In this chapter, we'll be covering Booleans and Conditionals, which are also frequently used in Python. Boolean is another data type, just as strings, integers, and floats that we dealt with in the previous chapters. Booleans only exist as true or false. It is used to say yes or no to a certain question. Booleans usually appear with comparison operators like these, and you can see that they appear to be quite familiar if you did some math or critical reasoning before. And this is an example where a result of a function is a Boolean. The return value of the function can run for precedent is a comparison operation. If age is greater than or equal to 35, the function would return true, and if not, false. We can see that it returns false for can run for precedent 19 and true for 45 using the print function. But there's one condition when using Booleans, which is that the variable that is being compared has to be an integer or a float, because obviously the two has to be in the same data type. Python is doing a mathematical calculation when comparing two variables. So here we can see that 3.0 is equal to 3, returns true, but string 3 equals to 3 does not return true. I said before, string is accepted as a human language, so Python doesn't know what value string 3 has. Python accepts this string as x or y that we use in calculus for an unknown variable which just happens to be in the shape of 3. Oh, and see how there are two equal signs when comparing? That's used to differentiate it from a single equal sign, which is used to assign values to variables in the first chapter. I'm pretty sure you'll get to see much errors because you get to confuse the two quite often. And this is another application of Boolean along with mathematical operator, which is modulus. An odd number would have a remainder of 1 if it was divided by 2, right? So if we use modulus is equal to 1, we can see if the number we put in is odd or even. Now this is a part that is related to logic, using and, or, and not with multiple booleans. If you've taken critical reasoning course before, I'm sure you all know what this does. In this function, the return value is natural born citizen and age is greater than or equal to 35. So if either condition is not met, it returns false. And you can see the results over here. And it'll be better to look at this chart over here. If you're confused, pause for a second and see how these operators work. And also there is a order of precedence. Not is calculated first, which isn't here, then and then or. It's just like math where the minus sign is calculated first and then multiplication and then addition. So for this code, and will be calculated first. True and false would result in false. And then true or false would result in true. So the result would be true. Since the codes could be much more complex, and it's always good to use parentheses or skip a line if necessary to make the code more readable and easily interpretable. So in this situation, the codes are getting much longer than the previous one. So we used parentheses and we used skipping lines to have better visual on the codes. And I think I might have explained conditionals a bit too early because we already talked about this in the previous videos, but let's take a bit deeper look from now on. There are three components to conditionals: if, which we dealt with before, and elif, and else. Now, we only covered if. elif is used when there is an additional situation we would like to define, and else is just what it says. If the input doesn't fall into any of the ifs and elifs, it goes to else. And I emphasized the importance of indentation before, but just for recap, indenting puts together whatever is indented into a block of code. So, as you can see, always printed does not fall into the conditional and is always printed regardless of the input value. Converting non-mathematic values into Booleans is also possible. And this is a part that does not need much understanding, but more of an intuition. Say the input value is numeric. If the input number is 0, it means false, and if it isn't 0, it's 1. For strings, if the input string is empty, it returns 0, and if it isn't empty, it returns true. So in most situations, it can be seen that false is returned when we put in something empty, regardless of its data type. It's hard to say why at this stage, but you'll get to understand when you actually start coding with Booleans. And in that sense, let's move on to exercises so that we can try coding ourselves.